Our new president of the Robert H. Jackson Center, Kristan McMahon, a relationship with our president here at Chautauqua, Michael Hill. And so let me just read something that Michael sent to Kristan and me, of which he thought of the idea of perhaps having Kristan submit her name as a candidate. And you probably have no recollection of this, but this is to Kristan, and you said, "You instantly came to my mind given your polished communication skills, your legal background, your abilities as a grassroots and organizational fundraiser for St. Bonaventure University, Youth for Understanding, and SITAR, not to mention your board service on each of those, and your strong desire to bring all you've learned by placing high-end executives in positions at Vetted Solutions to an organization you may lead in the future." That, by the way, that was one sentence.
They just revoked my journalism degree.
Lee Coppola would be so proud of you. So that was sort of the introduction, and then you also went on to say you were personally invested in helping in any way I can to ensure they being the Jackson Center, get a qualified new leader. And for that, we have hired Kristan McMahon as our new leader. And so why don't you give us a little bit of your impression of Kristan McMahon, something that we should know about her, since she will be playing a role in Chautauqua as well as in the community.
Well, as anyone in the room that knows you never send you an email and not wonder if it's going to come back to you. I was picking on Kristan today because I have had the great fortune of being on the other side of Greg's mic early in my tenure, and as she has often done in her life, she beat me. It's only her second day, so the fact that she's not wide-eyed and petrified is pretty amazing.
I did watch your YouTube video of it.
But Greg alluded to this. I've known Kristan my entire adult life. I wasn't going to put this into the intro, but yes, she dated my college roommate, so I've really known her that long. And she has a track record of participating in leading organizations that I've cared about, to the point that when I leave an institution and they ask me to find someone better than me to replace me, I call her. So it was President of Youth for Understanding. She's now on the board. When I left SITAR because I was up here more, they said the only way I could get off the board was to find someone smarter than I, and I called her. And then when Greg noted that he was looking for someone for the Jackson Center and we really needed someone good, I called her. So there's a lot of reasons and a lot of history for us. And the reason that I shared with Greg that I thought she was perfect for this, and you've seen her bio, so I won't share that with you. We know Justice Jackson used the law to bring justice and humanity, and I think Kristan brings a legal mind and a legal education to that. I told her, like every not-for-profit on the planet, there would be a ton of fundraising. And as Greg noted, she's done a good chunk of grassroots fundraising, but here's a little tidbit for you. One of the keys of fundraising is you get caught in cocktail parties a lot, where you have to know a lot about a lot or a lot about nothing. And this works well because she was a contestant on Jeopardy. So just to prove that it's not just bias, that even Alex Trebek thought she knew a lot about a lot.
Good thing she's not on right now.
I know.
That would be a far harder, yes.
But most importantly, and then I'll stop because I think the better intro is you all hearing from Kristan and not me. One of the things I've learned in the 2.5 years that I've been here is that to run institutions here, you have to care deeply and you have to be willing to put everything into it. I have watched her for all of her adult life. Anything that she decides to do, she tackles with this incredible heart that I'm excited for you all to get to meet. And if she brings half of what I've seen her bring to the other organizations, hang on, because the Jackson Center is about to be a national and international force. So I couldn't be more proud that she's here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And you're kicking me out now, right?
You're out of here.
All right, thanks.
Kristan, welcome, and do you believe everything he said?
Oh, of course. I always believe everything he tells me.
And here's a Jeopardy question. It was the final Jeopardy question about 3 years ago. Name the only person in the history of the United States to be a Solicitor General, Attorney General, and a Justice of the Supreme Court.
Who is Robert H. Jackson?
Yeah,
Okay. Thank you for the softball.
yeah. End of interview. You have a long and a distinguished resume, very impressive, and we'll get through some of that, but you were also the member of the Presidential Search Committee at St. Bonaventure. I think that was the one that led to Mr. DePiro?
Yes, Dr. DePiro, yes.
So you just were subject to a presidential search at the Robert Jackson Center. What did you glean from being on the other side of the table?
So first and foremost, to speak slowly and clearly. But it was helpful, obviously, to have an understanding of what organizations would be looking for. That was continued to be informed by my work at Vetted Solutions because we facilitated the job search for numerous nonprofits and associations. So I have seen the deliberations, I have seen what questions come up, and so honestly it was helpful just to have an understanding of the types of questions I was likely to get and spend some time being able to formulate the answers that would best convey the information I wanted to convey.
What did you know about the Jackson Center as you researched it after Michael sent you this email? What did you learn about it?
So I did a lot of research. I read some biographies of him as well and took a look at what the Jackson Center had been doing, the numerous programs they've been running, the 2,500 YouTube videos and counting, and the 8.5 million hits on YouTube, which was astonishing to me. And spent some time with the Gail Jarrow biography, read John Q. Barrett's blog and his information that he sends. And so it was really trying to get into the depth to also help me formulate an understanding of how his message would resonate today and how still very relevant it is and interesting and honestly a voice I think that today's world is crying out for.
Having worked at Vetted, which is a kind of a headhunting firm, and again, being on the other side, were there any questions that you got that you hadn't heard before?
There was a question, and actually I'm trying to remember it now. I just remember during the interview going, that was a new one for me. And it was asked by John Barrett. Wow, I cannot remember the actual question though, but yes, there certainly was a question for which I was not fully prepared. But hopefully I answered it correctly.
He didn't mention my name in that process.
He did not, no. In fact, they studiously avoided it.
So, what's clear is that in the area here at Chautauqua and now at other places and in the crowd, there's a cabal of St. Bonaventure people. What is it from that? Thank you, Mike Metzger.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
What is it that is perhaps part of the culture there as that Olean, Allegheny, New York kind of brings to the table?
So I think one of the things that St. Bonaventure University does exceptionally well is instill a love of service in its students. And it's not necessarily in an overt way, but there are so many opportunities for students to get involved both on campus and in the community that it becomes part of what you do and part of who you are. And we take that back out into the world with us. I've had the honor of serving as the president of the alumni board at St. Bonaventure for about 3 years. I just ended my service about a year ago. And there's a story from a book that Krista Tippett wrote that talks about how at the beginning of the world, we were all one light. And then something happened that shattered that light into a million pieces. And those pieces fell into a million things. And so everybody and everything and every action has this light that resonates and shines out in the world. And you just have to tap into that. And so that is a story I have actually relayed to the graduating seniors for the last couple of years because the imagery of that, and especially because it happens at the candlelight ceremony at the end of the year, is just so powerful, and I really want them to take that with them when they go.
So you went to school with Michael Hill.
I confess yes.
Give us your best Michael Hill story.
Oh. Oh, there are so many.
I love you.
So Michael, in addition to knowing him socially, was also my editor on the BV. And I can remember we went through this phase where we were changing the prompts on the computers. So they were more personalized, more interactive. This is the old Apple IIe's, maybe. And you could change, like, if you hit a wrong key, it would make some funky noise or whatever. And I believe it was Michael who orchestrated one of our professors that when you hit a critical error, the voice would come through and say, "I'd like to talk to you about changing your major."
Now, you were mentioned early on that there's actually a photo out there of 5 people, of which 4 are within the Chautauqua region. Who are the other ones?
So during Michael's investiture, there was a small group of Bonnies here. And so obviously it was Michael Hill. It was Shannon Rosner, his current Chief of Staff and VP of Strategic Initiatives. It was Brian Riveno, son of Mo, and myself. And then the 5th one, I think we'll keep anonymous for now, just in case she pops up later.
Okay, at least we know it's a she. This is good. Any stories on either of those 2 you want to talk about? Probably better reserve the Brian story till later. So then from there, why did you want to be interested in becoming part of law school? What was that? What triggered that? Was there somebody in the family that was lawyers?
No, I am the only lawyer in my family. As my aunt has said, why couldn't I be something useful like a doctor? But I come from a family of teachers and engineers, mostly. When I was writing my college essays, it was all about how I wanted to be the first female president of the United States. For both St. Bonaventure and American University, I actually mocked up the front page of a newspaper with me signing my first bill or something like that. And as I was going through college, loved the writing, loved the skills, I ended up being a double major with political science. And most of the classes I took in that realm were pre-law. And so just fell in love with the ability to tell stories in that different venue. And I participated in mock trial and Model UN, and it just really was how things were trending. And so towards the end of college, I thought, all right, I'm going to go to law school. I'm going to become the New York Times First Amendment lawyer. That was the passion. I could combine all of the passions. And when I got to the Catholic University of America, in their law school, they have a communications law program. At the time, it was the only certificate program in the country for communications law. And the focus of that, unbeknownst to me, really, was much more FCC focused, so radio, TV, satellites, which was a fascinating new thing to experience and where the technology was heading. So moved into that realm.
You go to Catholic University of America, Columbus School of Law, get a certificate in communications law, and then you launch out. One of the foremost antitrust law firms in the world is Howry. How did you end up there?
So there was a slight blip in the life doesn't go according to plan. And when I was graduating from law school, I had been doing a lot of internships at the FCC. And we had been in discussions about me coming on, starting there right after graduation. And then the government entered a hiring freeze. And so I graduated from law school without a job, which was a bit of a shock. And certainly not part of the plan. But it gave me the summer off to study for the bar, and then travel to Ireland with my parents afterwards. And so I actually, in DC, there are a lot of temp attorneys. And so they're hired on individual projects and work until that project is completed. And on the second project I did, that was for Howry, and I was hired off that project.
A little bit about them. They are, as far as come as antitrust, now they usually represent the plaintiff side, or are they defense?
It depends on the action. So a lot of what we did were mergers and acquisitions. So we would take one of the parties who was merging. From a litigation side, it was usually the defense, because that was usually some corporation that was getting sued that we represented.
Throughout your resume, there's reference to something, and this is a little arcane and perhaps nuanced, but Hart-Scott-Rodino filings, which is interesting. Was that Senator Hart? Was it Senator Scott? Peter Rodino?
Yes.
Wow. That dates us all, folks.
So that's the law that requires companies of a certain size to notify the government if they're going to merge or divest or acquire something of a certain size, so the government gets a chance to weigh in on whether or not that's allowed to happen.
Then from there, you launch into Verizon. Was that a logical step for you?
Yes, in my mind, it was getting back into tying the communications back into the law. So it was merging my interests again. One of the mergers I had worked on at Howry was Verizon's acquisition of MCI. And it just so happened that I had written one of the responses to the HSR requests for information. Once you go through the HSR process, then the government will come back and ask you more questions often. So it was in response to one of those, and it happened to be one of the pieces that Verizon lawyers liked the best. And so Verizon went out to there were 3 law firms who represented the company on that for various interests, and they went out to each of the law firms and said, we're looking to hire a new attorney in the antitrust group, and who would you recommend? And Howry recommended me.
And you were there really from October of 2006 to December of 2015. Were you one of those in-house counsel folks that beat up on the counsels that you hire and then have to work on billings and all that stuff? Are you one of those people?
I like to think of myself as a kinder, gentler lawyer.
Trust me, I'm on the other end of that all the time. Just curious how we can interact here. And then you launched into something new, Vetted Solutions, with an eye towards kind of getting into helping the not-for-profit world. Explain that role.
So Vetted Solutions was actually founded by a former Bonnie, and he started the company about 9 years ago. He had done a lot of work in the nonprofit space. He had actually been one of my very first internship bosses. You see, I tend to acquire people and then definitely keep in touch. And his business was growing and accelerating, and he asked me to come in for what he thought would be 4 to 6 weeks just to help out on a single project. And I ended up being there 2.25 years helping him on various projects. So yeah.
By the way, where are you from? Where are you a native of?
I'm a native Pittsburgher.
So now you're having spent so much time in Washington. When the Pirates play the Nationals, how do you play?
I definitely wear the black and gold every chance I get.
Okay. It's been a long slug, but
yes, it was a very disappointing decade and a half or so. But yes, the Steelers are much easier to root for.
So you make a decision that you're going to actually make a shot at this Robert Jackson Center. You do so successfully. You're here today. If we looked at a crystal ball 5 years hence, have you given any thought? I know you only been on the job all of 2 days, but as to what you might hope to accomplish by there?
Yes. So as you all in the room likely know, the 20th anniversary of the center and the 80th anniversary of Justice Jackson being named to the court are only 2 years away. And so certainly working towards how can we ground the center in a way that it needs to be grounded and give it wings in a way to make it fly. I have a vision that we will be a voice in the local area, at the state level, at the national level, and at the international level. Eventually, that might not happen in 2 years, but we will get there. And I think that there again, as I said, a lot of Justice Jackson's message, his values, certainly his communications and writing that speak very clearly and eloquently to questions people have now. There's still a lot of the same things that we're wrestling with. There are clear guidelines, I think, in what he has given us. And so now it's getting people to pay more attention, to listen, and start fostering those conversations rather than the combats.
What's the question you expected that I would ask you tonight that I haven't?
I did expect that you might ask me, where do I see myself in 10 years? Yeah, actually, I think I've prepared for everything you've asked so far.
That's disappointing to hear.
That's the lawyer to lawyer challenge.
With that, ladies and gentlemen, Kristan McMahon.